Mount Morris, a small town in central Michigan, was a typical representative of suburban America in the late 1990s. Here, life flowed calmly, without shocks, and the streets were surrounded by greenery in spring and summer. Residents knew each other, their children played in the yards, and the Buell School served as the center of community life. This place epitomized the ideal where children could study, make friends, and grow up under the protection of a caring environment. There was an atmosphere of unity and security in the city that seemed unshakable. Among the residents of Mount Morris was the Rolland family, in which 6-year-old Kayla was raised. Kayla was the youngest child in the family, which made her a lit star among her family. Her mother often said that Kayla filled the house with life and laughter. She loved the attention of adults and always tried to please others with her childish surprises, drawings, handmade postcards, and sweet compliments. Kayla was a special girl. She made friends easily and was able to find common ground, even with the most shy children. Her smile and energy attracted others, and teachers noted that she stood out not only for her kindness, but also for her desire to help others. Kayla always tried to be the first to support her peers if they were upset about something, said one of the teachers. She was a vivid example of what a child can be who grew up in love and care. On February 29, 2000, an ordinary day in the life of the Rolland family began. It was a cool winter day, but the sun breaking through the clouds promised spring soon. The morning at the Rollands' house was quiet and measured. Kayla woke up early, as always, and had breakfast with her mother. She was in high spirits, discussing how she would spend time with friends at school break, and which drawing she planned to finish in the next lesson. Kayla's mother remembered this morning as one of the most ordinary. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The girl, dressed in her favorite dress with a bright print, packed her backpack, put school supplies and a book in it, which she was given to read at home. She looked so happy when she walked out the door. I waved at her, and she answered me with her usual smile, the mother said later. Kayla picked up her backpack, pulled on bright gloves, and headed for the school bus. On the way to the bus stop, Kayla met several neighborhood children with whom she always went to school. They chatted animatedly, discussing their lessons, games, and plans for the evening. It was their little tradition that created a sense of closeness and joy. Kayla, as usual, was the center of attention. She was telling a funny story that made everyone laugh. When the school bus pulled up, the children noisily took their seats. Inside the salon, the usual atmosphere of animation reigned. Someone was telling jokes. Someone was sharing plans for the day. Kayla was sitting next to her friend, and they were discussing the upcoming drawing lesson. Her voice sounded cheerful, and nothing foretold that this day would end tragically. The tragedy that occurred that day was a shock not only for the school, but for the whole country. Prior to that, Mount Morris was considered a safe place where children could learn and grow up without fear for their lives. However, this fateful day changed everything, leaving an unhealed wound in the hearts of those who knew Kayla, and reminding everyone how important the responsibility of adults for the safety of children is. This story, which began as an ordinary morning in a small town, ended with an event that shocked the whole of America. But at that moment, when Kayla was sitting at her desk preparing for class, no one could imagine that a tragedy would happen in this quiet corner of the country, which would become an occasion for a national discussion about school safety and responsibility for the availability of weapons. The morning at Buell School was no different from any other day. Noisy corridors, children happily sharing the news, teachers who were preparing for lessons. Everything reminded of a calm and orderly life in the small town of Mount Morris, Michigan. In the classroom where 6-year-old Kayla Rolland studied, the usual school hustle reigned. The students took their seats, laid out books and notebooks, preparing for the first lesson. Kayla was sitting at her desk in the front row, chatting with a friend. She was one of those children whom teachers quickly notice and remember for their activity and kindness. Her radiant smile and bright eyes filled the classroom with a special atmosphere. The teacher, while preparing the material for the lesson, only glimpsed how the children were whispering and talking among themselves. The lesson began, and the children's attention turned to the teacher, who explained the new task. Everyone was working as usual. Someone was diligently writing down the teacher. Someone was whispering with a neighbor at the desk. At some point, one of Kayla's classmates took a gun out of his backpack. None of the children noticed it at first. Many might not even understand what it was. However, a moment later, he came up with the words, "I don't love you," and then a loud gunshot rang out, breaking the silence in the classroom. The class froze. The school atmosphere, which a second ago was filled with the usual children's activity, turned into chaos. The teacher, confused for a split second, immediately rushed to the children to understand what had happened. One of the students, who was next to Kayla, screamed. The boy who fired the shot looked like he didn't realize what had happened. Kayla, who was closest to the boy, was fatally wounded. Her body fell lifelessly to the floor. Other children started crying, and someone ran out of the classroom in fear. The teacher, trying to keep control of the situation, shouted at the children to stay in their places and immediately called for help. After a shot was fired in one of the classrooms, the school plunged into chaos. The teacher, who was in the classroom, immediately called for help, and the school administration reacted promptly by calling the police and an ambulance. The initial task of the school staff was to protect the rest of the students and minimize panic. Children from the classroom where the tragedy occurred were evacuated to a safe place, and the teacher stayed with the injured Kayla, trying to give her first aid. A few minutes later, the first police cars appeared at the school building. Their sirens cut through the air, attracting the attention of residents of nearby houses. Ambulance staff also arrived at the scene, who immediately went to the classroom to pick up Kayla and try to save her life. The doctors did their best, but the injuries turned out to be too serious, and Kayla died in the hospital a few hours later. A third grader 9-year-old Corey Sutton said he heard loud noises. "I thought it was a falling board or something similar," he recalled. "But when the principal came and told the teachers to urgently close the doors and lock them, I was scared. My heart was racing." By the time the police arrived, the school had already been cordoned off. Officers set up a perimeter so that no one could get inside, as well as to protect children and school staff. Parents of students who began to gather outside the school in a panic were told that their children were safe, but something terrible had happened inside. The atmosphere of tension and anxiety grew by the minute, until the information about what happened became clearer. The police entered the building and immediately went to the classroom where the incident occurred. The first thing that caught my eye was the chaos that remained after the tragedy. Empty desks, abandoned notebooks, overturned chairs, and a tense silence that seemed to be in the air. The teacher, despite the shock, gave an initial explanation, describing how a 6-year-old boy pulled out a gun and fired a shot. The boy threw the gun in the trash and ran to the next toilet. He was found there, sitting in a corner, and was taken into custody immediately afterwards. He looked confused and scared, as if he didn't understand what had happened. The police did not use harsh methods when dealing with him, as it was obvious that a small child was standing in front of them, who himself did not realize the seriousness of his act. The boy was taken to the police station for further proceedings, and then transferred to the Juvenile Affairs Department. He was under guard until he was transferred to the Genesee County Family Independence Agency, Child Protection Service, which could determine his further placement. Meanwhile, detectives began collecting evidence at the scene. The first thing they noticed was the weapon that was in the trash can. It was a small pistol that turned out to be loaded. The police immediately seized it for examination. Fingerprints were also collected to confirm who exactly was holding the weapon. Notebooks, backpacks, and other items left in the classroom were also examined to reconstruct the chronology of events. Investigators also found a kitchen appliance in the student's backpack. The teacher's interrogation was a key moment in the beginning of the investigation. He said that the boy behaved calmly until the moment of the shot, and nothing in his behavior aroused suspicion. The teacher stressed that everything happened so quickly that he had no opportunity to react. The boy looked like an ordinary child, quiet, but not alarming. None of the adults knew that he had a weapon in his backpack. However, initial reports will indicate that the boy may have been showing guns to his classmates prior to the incident. Everything that happened that day revealed systemic problems that many had previously preferred not to think about. School security measures, control over the storage of weapons, the responsibility of adults for the availability of dangerous items. All this has become the subject of heated discussions in society, but for Kayla Rolland's family, this day will be a day of irreparable loss forever. After the tragic incident, the police focused their efforts on restoring the chronology of events and finding out how the 6-year-old boy was able to access the weapon. Was someone from outside involved? And finally, who and what responsibility should be borne? Every detail was important, and the investigation required the involvement of many specialists, from criminologists to psychologists. After the incident, the boy was taken to the local police station. Realizing that they were facing a child who most likely did not realize the seriousness of his act, the detectives invited a child psychologist to help in the conversation. The main task of the police was to establish how the boy got access to the weapon, and to do so in such a way as not to cause him additional psychological trauma. The boy, who was in a state of shock, did not say anything at first. He was scared and withdrawn, often turned away from adults, and was silent. The psychologist tried to create an atmosphere of trust by asking simple and unobtrusive questions. Over time, the child began to share information. He said that he found the gun at home, on a table in one of the rooms. "I thought it was a toy," he said quietly. "I wanted to show it to my friends." These words became the key to further investigation. The police realized that the boy did not realize that the weapon could be dangerous. It did not occur to him that his actions could lead to tragedy. It was this detail that confirmed the suspicions of the police. The problem lies in the negligence of adults who allowed the child access to weapons. Based on the testimony of the child, detectives went to the house where he lived. It was a small and cluttered house, located in a deprived area of Mount Morris. The area has long been known to police for its high crime rate, including cases of trafficking in illegal substances and illegal possession of weapons. The house where the boy lived looked typical of these places. The windows were partially boarded up. The yard was overgrown with grass, and garbage and old things were lying on the porch. When the police entered the house, they saw a picture of complete disorder. The rooms were cluttered, the furniture was old, and there were leftovers, bottles, and various small items on the tables and floor. In one of the rooms, according to the boy, there was a table on which he found a gun. The weapon was indeed lying there, unprotected, in plain sight. During the search, the police found not only the pistol used by the boy, but also other firearms. Some pistols and shotguns were in cupboards that were not locked. Ammunition was scattered around the house. Some of it lay on kitchen tables, others in drawers. The police were amazed to realize that the weapon was available not only for adults, but also for children living in the house. In addition, a suitcase with prohibited substances was found in one of the rooms. This immediately made it clear to the police that the house was not just a place of residence, but also a point of illegal activity. All the discovered items were seized for further study. It was especially important to confirm that the weapon did not have any protective mechanisms, such as locks or safes, that could prevent a child from accessing it. Several people lived in the house: the boy's mother, her roommate, and another relative, a 19-year-old young man who turned out to be the owner of the gun. When the police started asking questions, the adults got confused about the testimony. The boy's mother claimed that she did not know that her son had taken the gun. Her roommate said that the weapons were kept safe, although it is obvious that this is not the case. The 19-year-old relative, the owner of the gun, tried to justify himself, saying that he left the weapon for a couple of minutes, but later admitted that he rarely cared about hiding it from children. "I didn't think the child would want to take it," he said. His words caused outrage among the detectives. It was obvious that the young man did not realize his responsibility for leaving the weapon unattended. The police conducted an in-depth investigation of the identity of the gun owner. It turned out that he had already been prosecuted for minor offenses related to prohibited substances and also had an unregistered weapon. This fact was an additional confirmation of his negligence and unpreparedness for the possession of dangerous objects. In parallel with the investigation, the police and social services began working with the boy. He was transferred to a specialized center where he was under the supervision of child psychologists. The child was under a lot of stress. He often cried and said that he didn't want to hurt anyone. Psychologists noted that the boy did not understand that his actions had led to the death of another person. For him, the gun really seemed like a toy, and what happened looked to him like a terrible mistake. Sessions with psychologists were aimed at helping the child cope with feelings of guilt and fear. However, the problem was that the boy grew up in an environment where no one taught him basic safety rules. Psychologists have raised the issue that the child has never heard that guns can be dangerous and has not received proper education. Social services also began to assess the possibility of transferring the boy to another family, as his life in the house where he grew up clearly threatened his well-being. They noted that this was a case of gross negligence on the part of adults who not only did not care about his safety, but also put him in conditions that could repeatedly lead to dangerous situations. Social services began to assess the boy's living conditions even before the tragedy, but their work was minimal. After the incident, they conducted a full investigation and found that the boy often skipped school, did not receive proper nutrition, and was isolated from his peers. Their report stated that the boy needed immediate help and protection. This situation has become an occasion to discuss how effectively social services work in dysfunctional families. Many experts noted that the tragedy could have been prevented if the intervention had occurred earlier.
Brian and Sue were not naming him because he was just 6 at the time, was never charged, and because he's been the target of all.
The boy, who became an unwitting participant in this tragedy, was transferred to a foster family. His subsequent fate became an example of how important it is to intervene in time in the lives of children in a dangerous environment. Psychologists continued to work with him, helping him cope with the shock. The boy was not charged with murder because of his age. After the investigation was completed, the police referred the case to the court. The main defendant was a 19-year-old relative of the boy who owned the gun. His actions, or rather their absence, were recognized as the cause of the tragedy that claimed the life of 6-year-old Kayla Rolland. But the responsibility of adults did not end there. The police and the prosecutor's office also drew attention to the boy's mother and other adults who lived in the house. The 19-year-old gun owner became a central figure in the lawsuit. The prosecutor's office has filed charges against him for illegal possession of weapons, violation of the rules of their storage, and negligence, which led to tragic consequences. Prosecutors insisted that it was his actions, or lack thereof, that made the child's access to the gun possible. During the trial, it turned out that the young man already had a criminal past, including charges of possession of prohibited substances and weapons. He could not provide any documents for the gun, which confirmed its illegal possession. This man showed blatant negligence by leaving a weapon in plain sight in the house where the children lived, the prosecutor said in his speech. Defense lawyers tried to present the defendant as an immature young man who did not realize the consequences of his actions. However, the prosecution refuted this line, stressing that the defendant already had experience with the law and understood the consequences of his inaction.
The boy's uncle's roommate got prison time for allowing the boy access to the gun.
Eventually, the court sentenced him to several years in prison for illegal possession of weapons and negligence that led to the death of a child. This verdict was an important signal to the public about the need for a stricter approach to responsibility for the safety of weapons. The boy's mother also became the focus of the investigation. The prosecutor's office has filed charges against her for negligent attitude to her child-rearing duties. Although she stated that she did not know that her son had taken the gun, the investigation found that she had not taken any measures to ensure the safety of the child or to protect him from the adverse influence of adults living in the house. Social services noted in their report that the mother repeatedly neglected her duties. The child was often left unattended, growing up in a chaotic and unsafe environment. During the trial, her lawyers insisted that she did not know about the presence of weapons in the house, but the prosecution insisted, not knowing does not mean being innocent. The boy's mother was sentenced to probation and required to take mandatory parenting and rehabilitation courses. Her further role in her son's life was limited as he was placed under the care of social services. The case of the boy and his family has revealed deep problems in the child protection system. Social services have been criticized for failing to intervene in a child's life in a timely manner despite many warning signals. The public wondered why the family, which had already attracted attention because of its disadvantage, was not under constant surveillance. This tragedy has prompted local authorities to review the work of social services. New protocols have been introduced to strengthen control over families at risk. Social workers have been given more authority to carry out inspections and assess the living conditions of children. The tragedy caused a wave of discussions at the legislative level. Discussions have begun in states across the country about the need to tighten laws governing gun possession. Some states have passed laws requiring gun owners to use safes or locks to store guns, especially in homes with children. In Michigan, legislative changes have been proposed that would increase adult liability for negligent gun possession. Although the laws were not passed immediately, this case became an important precedent that continued to be discussed over the years. Mount Morris was a small town where most of the residents knew each other. The death of 6-year-old Kayla Rolland shocked everyone. People couldn't believe that a tragedy of this magnitude could happen in their quiet and safe community, as they believed. Parents who sent their children to school wondered if their own children could have been victims of such negligence. People began to gather at the doors of the Buell School to express condolences to Kayla's family and support those affected by this tragedy. Teachers, parents, and classmates of the girl carried flowers, notes, and toys. One of the neighbors who was present said, "We have always believed that our children are safe at school. Now we are not sure that this is the case." The school teachers who worked with Kayla and her classmates were also deeply shocked. Many of them, including those who were in the building that day, sought psychological help. "We weren't ready for this," one of the teachers said. "This is not something that teachers should face, but now we understand that we have to be ready for anything." Shortly after the tragedy, the Buell School administration, along with teachers, students, and their parents, organized a small memorial in memory of Kayla. A bench with a memorial plaque was installed near one of the trees in the schoolyard, on which her name and the words were stamped, "Her light will burn in our hearts forever." This bench became a place where classmates and teachers could stop, think, and remember her. The students of Kayla's class also took part in the creation of this memorial. They made a collage of her drawings, and one of the teachers compiled a book of memories where children and adults could write down their words about Kayla. The memories of how she delighted everyone with her energy and kindness became an important part of their process of accepting this tragedy. After the tragic accident, Buell Elementary School was closed in 2002 and soon demolished in 2009.
The 6-year-old tomboy with blue, mischievous eyes had become the nation's youngest school shooting victim.
Kayla became the youngest victim of a school shooting in the United States before the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, and her attacker remains the youngest school fatality offender to date and the second youngest school offender overall. Kayla Rolland's story is a tragic reminder of how easily safety and trust can be violated if the negligence and irresponsibility of adults endanger the lives of children. Her death stirred up society, exposing systemic problems that many preferred not to notice. This is not only a story of human tragedy, but also a call to action aimed at protecting the most vulnerable members of our society.